Yoshi just dropped a patch yesterday, and depending on who you play, your reaction is one of two things. Either, oh my god, what an incredible patch, or, wow, this patch sucks, my hero got nerfed. So today we'll talk about which one your reaction should be based on the heroes that you play, as well as the overall impacts of this patch on the meta so far from what we know. So we'll talk about builds, items a little bit, heroes that got nerfed, heroes that got buffed, what is significant and what is probably not going to be much of a change at all. So let's start with the first general change, which is the weapon investment category. It got buffed essentially. So the more you spend in the weapon investment, the more weapon damage you get. For example, previously it was capped at, I believe, 93% if you had spent 28,000. But now if you max it out, so if you just buy a bunch of orange items and you max it out, you'll get a total of 115% weapon damage. Now this does require you to spend 28,000 souls. So in most games, you're not going to be able to spend that much on a weapon item. So the more realistic threshold to hit is probably the 16,000 or the 22,400 threshold. And those were buffed by much smaller amounts. The 16,001 was only buffed by 3%. And the 22,400 one was buffed by a total of 12%. So not massive buffs for gun, but will definitely make gun builds even that much stronger super late into the game. And they were already pretty strong once you got to the late game. The problem was getting them up and running. Now, the next change confuses a lot of people, and I see a ton of misinformation spread about this, and it's the CC change. So we read in the general changes, applying CC to an enemy is reduced in duration when affected by other CCs in a short interval. Each previously applied CC reduces duration by 7% up to a max of 21% over the past 7 seconds. So if you get hit by 3 CC, each CC will be reduced subsequently. So I'm saying that word a lot, but basically this only applies to things that are procced by reactive barrier, right? So for example, Abrams, shoulder charge and ultimate activates reactive barrier. And so for example, if I charge someone and I ult them right away, my ult will be reduced by 7% in the duration of the stun, right? But there's a bunch of other types of CC in the game that don't proc reactive barrier. For example, we can go over as Lash, right? And if you just use ground strike, that's a type of knock-up. That doesn't proc reactive barrier unless you actually get them out of the air. You've got move speed slows as well that don't proc reactive barrier, slowing hex, silence wave. So tons of CCs are not going to be affected by this. And I see a lot of people that are, complaining like, oh, so if I use slowing hex or silence wave, then it'll reduce my other CCs. So I'm not, incentivized to kind of combo these things, but it's only the things that proc reactive barrier. Now we have the third general change, which is matchmaking considers more balanced rosters. Now this is one of my recent games, just to show you guys, and let me remove my camera so you can see, but these are the rosters, right? And from my experience, here's what I think the changes to matchmaking are. So it seems that it's limiting the teams to have generally around 2 carries, right? And it also seems to be considering one kind of more supportive like CC hero, but that doesn't seem to be the case in every game. Obviously we don't exactly know because they don't say, but for example, this game, right, my team has 2 traditional carry heroes in the sense of Vyper and Haze. The enemy team here has Mirage and Infernus, and they have Mina this time, which you could consider to be a carry or not, depending on your kind of perspective. But if you consider Mirage and Infernus quote unquote carries and Vyper and Haze quote unquote carries, then this logic makes sense. Now if we look at the previous game that I played, once again we see kind of a similar idea where, okay, let's say we have Vyper and Mirage as carries, and here we would have Infernus and Mina would be considered as carries, so both teams has 2 carry. We can look at the previous game and kind of see that it's a similar logic every time. So I'm not actually sure if that is the change that they made, but it does seem very likely that that's kind of the direction that they went in with that change. The next change requires shooting while in the air. So if you shoot while jumping, you'll see there's a slight inaccuracy period basically right after you jump, but you can shoot while jumping right away. This is mostly a small change. I don't think it's too significant, but it's in the patch notes. Now, a big movement change is that subsequent wall jump costs 0.5 stamina. So as you can see, my first wall jump is free, but if I wall jump again, it'll cost me half a stamina bar. Now, the reason that they did this most likely is to kind of stop the wall jump stalling that you could do for quite some time. Now, you can still wall jump stall to a decent extent, but a lot of heroes could kind of just get around for free. And there was also some insane routes that you could do with very little stamina, and I think that they wanted to limit that a little bit. They also nerfed corner boosting. I don't think it's a huge deal for most things, but it's nerfed by 20%. Now, we've got some mid-boss changes. So the base HP of mid-boss was increased by 500, but the damage resistance per second was decreased fairly significantly. So it went from 50 base to 35 base, and then +5 per minute instead of +7 per minute. So overall, this should make mid-boss a little bit easier to kill with kind of less people shooting it, more likely. I don't think it's much of a change. Now, the big changes are that they nerfed the Rejuve bonus HP, which gives you 10% instead of 15%. So Rejuve itself is a little bit weaker. And the second mid-boss only gives you 3 instead of 4 Rejuve. So pretty significant change there as well. Now, there's a change with the unsecured souls. So if you kill someone and they've got a big bag of souls, you now have to heavy melee it to secure it. So you can't just walk on top of it. Now you have to heavy melee it. So one small issue with this change is that it does have a hitbox to an extent. So I think you can kind of shoot through it. They might have fixed it, but I believe that sometimes it messes up your aim. But anyway, it's a cool change. And basically you have to heavy melee to secure it. So there's going to be a little bit more of like a parry mind game around that. And I think that it's a cool change. Now, there's some solar changes to the speed that you get, basically, right? So instead of getting 7 meter speed, you get 3.5 meters base speed from the urn when you pick it up. As you can see, I move a little bit faster, but not anywhere near as fast as you moved in the previous patch. So movement's going to be a little bit more important. It's going to be perhaps a little bit more important to use the jump pad to get to the stairs faster and no movement routes. But you do become tankier when you pick up the urn, which is interesting. They also increase the amount of damage that you take when you're holding the urn for too long, which is a good change because I don't think anybody enjoys the mechanic of just holding onto the urn for, you know, ages. Now, there's some changes that are not usually a huge deal. So the neutral shop now allows you, this shop right here allows you to buy if there's an enemy nearby, right? So even if I spawn an enemy right here, well, he just fell through the ground. But if I spawn an enemy, I can still buy normally, right? It doesn't stop me. So I can sell an item, I can buy, I can do whatever, which previously you could not do. The walker attack range, meaning the range you need to be in to attack the walker, was nerfed by 1 meter. So for example, as you can see, now I need to be kind of right here. So previously in the previous patch, this would have worked, but now you need to be just slightly closer to hit it. Now they also changed something with certain proc items, for example, you know, items that are going to be like crippling or any proc item like headhunter, headshot booster, etc., are going to be applied after the shred, right? So for example, if you have a bullet resist shredder and headhunter damage is going to be applied after the bullet resist shredder effect, which before apparently wasn't the case. I think that this was just a bug. You know, they just said it was ordering issues. So this is also a buff to, you know, a lot of these items. One thing that they added that I don't really know how useful it's going to be is input buffering. So in theory, now you can kind of buffer things, right? So if you do an action and then you want to do another one, for example, you can press 1 and then hold left click and it'll technically buffer your shooting right after. I've heard that this is quite buggy and there's a lot of heroes for which and abilities for which it doesn't work. So we'll see kind of like what they do with that. Now, getting into the hero changes, we've got Abrams right here. Abrams did get a nerf to his scaling on Siphon Life, so he'll be doing less damage. However, the heal ratio has been buffed, which will make, you know, which will make healing booster even better on him. And on top of that, we'll just kind of play into his more tanky nature rather than just one-shotting you. Similarly, in order to kind of reduce the one-shot, they changed the thing to give you weapon damage rather than weapon damage percent. So this is plus 2.2 weapon damage. Basically, the difference is that this gives you bullet damage instead of just straight up weapon damage. So this will result in the melee hit after the charge being weaker, right? So if you charge someone and you melee them and you have 1 point in your 2, it's not going to do as much damage as it would have previously. It's going to nerf it a little bit. So both of those things kind of contribute to just nerfing how much Abrams can one-shot you. Now, Billy got pretty much a nothing burger change. His base move speed was nerfed a little bit, and they added the move speed to Blasted, which requires you to put 1 point in Blasted, and you get a little bit more move speed when you're Blasted. So effectively, when you're Blasted, you're actually faster than you were before. So in combat, this might be a bit of a nerf, but out of combat, this is a slight nerf when you're not Blasted. Calico is probably one of the biggest winners of the patch. She just got a lot of quality of life changes, which I think is really all she needed. Her numbers are not actually that bad. It's just that her spells were really awkward to hit before. Now her spells are going to be a lot more generous as far as the hitbox, right? So Leaping Slash now has a much higher vertical hitbox. So this can matter when you're trying to hit enemies that are, for example, on bridges like this. Now it's going to be much more generous with the vertical hitbox as far as like, you know, how close you need to be to the target and like how accurate you need to be with Leaping Slash. It's going to be a little bit more forgiving, which is good. On top of that, Gloom Bomb's radius also got increased, so now there's a much bigger radius, which makes it a lot easier to poke people in lane with Gloom Bombs, as the explosion radius is increased by 0.5 meters, which is pretty significant. And you've got a Return to Shadows buff two ways. They nerfed the cooldown by 10, sorry, they buffed the cooldown by decreasing it by 10 seconds. And they also made the AoE bigger from 7 meters to 7.5 meters. And this thing actually is like actually massive, by the way. You know, like this is really, really, really big. And especially if you get any sort of range, you know, it might be interesting to go something like Greater Expansion, because then your ult is like actually huge, right? And it's basically unmissable, you know, even through walls as you get to 10 meters, which is a massive AoE. I'm going to skip the Doorman and Drifter changes as they're mostly fairly insignificant, just some, you know, quality of life changes. So I'm not going to talk about them for the sake of time efficiency. Dynamo got some very, very small changes as well. Namely, his kinetic, you know, his one ability goes slightly higher. Kind of a nothing change as well. And his spirit scaling on his 3 got improved very slightly as well. So mostly nothing. We got some big changes to Grey Talon, however, which a lot of people hated. So he got his scaling nerfed very significantly on charge shot. And on top of that, when you fly now, before, if you canceled the flight, you would maintain the dashes, sending you really far, right? As well as the infinite dashes. But now, when you cancel your flight, you don't maintain that anymore. So basically what happened before is, you know, you would go on Grey Talon, he would be in flight, and then basically all he would do is he would cancel his flight, and then he would dash away from you super far. But now he needs to stay in his flight in order to be able to, like, you know, do the infinite dashes, which is a huge nerf to Grey Talon, and I think, you know, very deserved. The sniper hero probably shouldn't have infinite survivability. Now, Gun IV got hit very, very hard. Her weapon scaling got hit very significantly. So her DPS at max level is now 109 DPS. I think before the patch, it was something like 125 or something like that. It was significantly higher. So she lost about 16 max DPS. So her scaling got hurt a lot, which is going to hurt the hero, the, you know, weapon build. I don't think it's dead necessarily, but it's definitely nerfed overall. For sure. In order to kind of compensate, they increased her spirit scaling per boon. So they've started doing this thing with this patch where certain heroes will gain more spirit per boon than others. So Ivy gains 1.2 spirit per boon now. And on top of that, they've increased the Kutsu Bomb. Oh, sorry, they've decreased the Kutsu Bomb DPS, but they have increased the Stone Form damage scaling, right? And airdrop no longer grants allied bullet resistance. It still grants the barrier. So overall, just IV nerfs for the most part. I think the stone form changes kind of whatever. But yeah, we'll see. Now, Kelvin also got some decent nerfs. His DPS base was taken from, I believe, 72 DPS to something around 67, 68 DPS here. On top of that, his clip size was reduced by 1. And his spirit power was increased. So that's actually a buff there. So they gave him a slight buff for the spirit power, but everything else was nerfed. Now, when you go to max level, his DPS is going to be a little bit worse as well, which is a good change overall. Like, you know, you're going to see a little bit less gun Kelvin. It's just not going to be as good as it was. I think that this hero is still going to be insane. I don't think he got enough nerfs. He probably warranted more, but let me know what you guys think. Now, Lady Geist got a buff to her bomb damage scaling. Now, to me, this is kind of like the most whatever change of the patch, because you don't really build a lot of spirit on Geist in the first place, because spirit scales your self damage, right? So it's usually kind of rough to build a lot of spirit. So I don't think that this is going to change anything for Geist, but it makes the bomb slightly bit better. Now, our boy Lash, my beloved, he got some changes. Unfortunately, he got nerfs. His ground strike range was nerfed by 1 meter. Now, as you can see, this would have hit previously. But, you know, since it was nerfed by 1 meter, it doesn't really hit anymore. So it's nerfed ever so slightly. Well, I can't, for some reason, I can't, you know, showcase it to you guys properly. But as you can see right here, this would have hit previously, but it's not hitting. Also, his ground strike cooldown was increased by 2 seconds from 19 to 21 seconds. Which is around a 10%, a little bit higher than 10% nerf to his base cooldown. Now, you do still get the -10 cooldown on your 1 AP, which turns into an 11-second cooldown. And then when you buy superior cooldown, which you inevitably will, unless your ground strike is now an 8.25-second cooldown, whereas before it was like a 6.75 seconds. So pretty significant nerf percentage-wise. I would say it's like a 10 to 15% cooldown nerf, depending. Probably not going to affect him too much. And the base damage was reduced by 10. Now, if you combine this with the item nerfs that we're going to go over later, Lash is definitely somewhat weaker than he was prior to the patch. He's still going to be fine, I think, but definitely weaker. Now, Mina got some pretty peak changes. First of all, new heavy melee animation. I mean, check it out. It looks pretty good. A lot of people love it. I love it myself. And on top of that, she can now float if you use right click, right? So you can float through the air if you use right click for a couple seconds. You can use this to kind of like maintain momentum sometimes. There's some pretty cool uses of it. Anyway, I was watching Ido and he was getting pretty creative with it. So I think it's cool. And I think the umbrella animation is pretty peak. So I'm always loving that unique stuff. They hurt the rake base scaling a lot. So now you kind of need to put 2 points in rake if you want to heal a lot from it, because now it's 0.5 base scaling. But if you put 2 points in it, you get the old scaling back on the heal per kill. On top of that, they buffed tier 3 rake because not a lot of people were buying it, so now it's 7% missing health instead of 6%, so it should do a lot of damage. They nerfed the cooldown on Sanguine Retreat. They added 3 seconds to it, and on top of that, they killed the Nox Nostra objective destroying build basically in a few ways. First of all, it does 50% less damage to objectives. Second of all, they made it so that there's a cap on how much extra damage each bat can do to the objective. Even though it does current health damage, each bat can only do 20 total damage, which nerfs it significantly. And on top of that, Spirit Burn, which we'll talk about later, now has a cooldown against neutrals and stuff like that. I know it still says on the description, does not expend its cooldown unless a hero is hit. That is outdated. Mirage got one line, but it's an evil line. So basically, his one line is cooldown reduction now applies to Jin's Mark. So this applies to Jin's Mark time between procs, right? So as you can see, for example, if I shoot someone normally, right, my procs take X amount of time, right? But if I buy a bunch of cooldown reduction, then all of a sudden my procs are going to be able to proc much faster, and it will make it so I can stack to 8x or 12x much faster. And the Mirage builds that I've seen so far have been pretty evil, so beware for the Mirage players in your pubs. Moen Krul got hurt quite a lot. There's some item changes that hurt him for sure, but basically his bullet resist in burrow was cut from 80% to 60%. Now, to explain the math very quickly, that effectively means that he takes double the damage from weapons that he did previously. Previously, he took 20%, right? Because he had 80% bullet resist, meaning he took 20% damage. Now he goes from taking 20% damage to 40% damage. So even though it might not seem like that much of a nerf, it's essentially he's taking double the damage that he would have taken previously from weapons, which is very, very significant. Before, it was essentially like useless to shoot him in burrow. Now it should do some damage. On top of that, his combo duration was nerfed. And when you combine that with the overall CC change that happened earlier in the patch notes, I do think that this hero is going to be a lot weaker. I think he's still going to be totally fine. Just because his kit has so much utility, but he's definitely going to be a little bit weaker, which was deserved. Now, Paige got basically a wall of text, right? And I'm going to summarize it to you just so that you don't really have to read everything, because there's a lot of changes, but basically it doesn't really change much at the end of the day, from my experience playing Paige. The first change is that your ult will scale as it goes through the map, right? So if I hit someone all the way across the map, technically it'll do way more damage. I think up to 100% damage extra, right? That just scales the damage. And also your knights, like, they don't get any bigger. What I would love for them to do is make the knights bigger as they travel the map, so you feel more incentivized. Because right now it's so hard to hit this ultimate across the map. It just feels like incredibly difficult. But anyway, that's one of the changes. Another one of the changes is they buffed her 3. So Captivating Read now has a bigger AoE by 0.5 meters, that's a great change. They slightly changed the barrier, so they basically made it have a bigger cooldown, but also be active longer. I think this is kind of like a whatever change. It's not going to impact much. Now, one thing that a lot of people are liking is she has increased bullet velocity. And on top of that, like I said, we'll touch on the items, but high velocity rounds got buffed. So basically what this means is you can effectively last it in lane now. If you buy high velocity rounds, especially with the increased velocity, you don't really get denied that much anymore. You have enough velocity. You still don't have a lot of velocity. I mean, even with high velocity, it's only 63 meters per second, but it's enough. It's enough to secure last hits. Now, her bullet damage overall was nerfed. Her bullet growth was nerfed. So gun build should be worse, although you have higher velocity. So in a way, maybe it's better, because it's easier to hit. Hard to say for now, but regardless, those are the main ones. The one that frustrates me, that is frustrating to me, is the fact that her ultimate was essentially nerfed in the situations that you would use it, which is very often you would use the ultimate from like this distance, right? And from this distance, it overall does less damage than it did previously. I know that looks like a lot of damage, but that's because I have it maxed and it's on a bot. But if I don't have it maxed and I use it here, previously it would do 150. Right now it's doing 136. And as you can see, the guy needs to be that far away for me to do the same damage that I did with my ultimate previously. Now, they did fix the kind of dead zone in front of you, so if you're really close to someone, it should still hit them, which is a great change. But I'm a little bit frustrated that overall it's a slight nerf to a hero that feels like she's already not that strong. Now, 7 got hit really hard. Power Surge scaling was nerfed by 10%. On top of that, Static Charge tier 2 was nerfed by 1 meter. And on top of that, the Lightning Strike and the Lightning Strike Spirit Power were hurt. So the Lightning Strike is the extra like little, you know, damage that you can do when you ult. This little thing right here. I don't think he's like completely gutted, but he's definitely nerfed. I think his win rate's still going to be positive at like almost all ranks, except maybe super high rank. But for the majority of you guys, like 7's still going to be really strong. Now, Victor might be hotfix worthy. This hero got buffed perhaps a little bit too much. There's a couple things that happened, but basically I'll go over the ones that are really significant. His base max health, his base health, not max health, got changed to 720 instead of 680, which makes him a little bit stronger in lane, which was kind of his one of his weaknesses. On top of that, his pain battery now charges quicker. You'll need to take 40% of your max health instead of 50%, which is a significant buff. And the really big change is the Aura of Suffering now does only 85% self-damage instead of 100%, right? Which makes it so you can basically tank this thing, no problem, especially once you get Spirit Resilience. So I think it's pretty likely this hero gets hotfixed. They also buffed his ultimate, and when you max it, after you die, you essentially get permanent fire rate and spirit damage per bullet while your ultimate is on cooldown. So if you don't die, you just have like permanent Mercurial Magnum, essentially. It's basically just permanent Mercurial Magnum with the fire rate and spirit damage per bullet. And 10 spirit damage per bullet is kind of crazy, because if, for example, let's say that I'm level, 20 and I have, I don't know, just like a little bit of gun items, let's just buy some, my damage per bullet is 24. So this is essentially like almost 50% more damage, as well as the fire rate. It's not quite, it's more like 40%, but still, that's very, very, very potent. So we'll see if people start maxing it, but I think that there's potential with this. I'm expecting him to get nerfed, but we'll see. Vindicta got a little bit of love. Now, it seems that most of the love that they're giving to Vindicta, they're giving to her gun and her flight, right? So flight got some buffs, and on top of that, her gun base DPS got some buffs as well. We'll see how much this helps Vindicta. I think that she struggles from a couple things right now, and kind of one thing about her build before the stake build was that you didn't really need to get like kind of in the action in order to use this build, and that's what made it so good, is you could play really safe and essentially just like stake and crow people from a distance and have tons of impact. Now you kind of need to get into the action to have impact. Her assassinate spirit scaling also got increased, right? So I think that some early, spirit stacking Vindicta, like perhaps with improved spirit, something like enchanters and something like rapid recharge, you could start chunking people with your assassinate. It could be a little problematic, in fact, but let's say you get 2 points in your assassinate. As you can see with these items, my assassinate does 450 damage, and this is, not that many items, right? So I think that there's definitely some potential, as I can just, almost, when someone's below half health, you'll basically just one-shot them with this build, right? So if I just get this guy below half, and then I headshot him, he just dies instantly, as you can see. Viscous overall was nerfed. His ult base fire was nerfed, so now his right click does a little bit less damage. It's a 42 base damage, as you can see, 42 right here from this range. His alt fire damage growth was buffed, though, to compensate. So that means that, in the mid game, it'll probably be roughly the same thing. So it'll probably still be really strong. But they thought his lane was a little bit too strong. And his splatter base damage was also nerfed from 80 to 70. So he kind of got the Lash treatment, as well as his splatter tier 1, though, was increased to compensate a little bit. So it's now -6 cooldown. So not super significant for Viscous, but definitely decent nerfs. Now, Vyper got some really big changes here. So Vyper got a rework, essentially. So Screw Jab Dagger has been completely reworked, and it has now a stacking mechanic similar to Shiv Knives. So as you can see, I hit one Screw Jab Dagger, it does 50 damage. I hit a second one, it does 75. And if I hit a third one, it does 100 damage. And any subsequent ones will, kind of like do 125. That's kind of the max damage per stack, if you will, right? So the max stacks are 3. When you have 3 stacks, that's when you're doing the most damage with your daggers. And the stacks give you more damage per stack. It slows their movement speed, right? And on top of that, when you have 2 points in, it reduces their bullet resist, right? So if you get 1 stack on them, all of a sudden they have -13% bullet resist. Here is -18, and here is -23 bullet resist. So very, very, sorry, very significant, for sure. And I think that this will impact the way that we're seeing Vyper be played. So I've been kind of playing some evil Vyper builds. Here's a quick idea of what I've been doing. This build is terrible. Please do not run this at home, but it's really fun. And the idea is essentially this is Spirit Vyper. You're just throwing daggers at people, and you're also making somebody else unable to play the game with Petrifying Bola and Focus Lens, and you get duration. But anyhow, I can't speak. I think Spirit Vyper is more of a thing now, and I also think that she has some potential as a support, because this is a ton of bullet resist shred to be applying an ability from a relatively, you know, safe range, and her laning got improved quite significantly with these daggers as well. Now, the other significant change is the fact that you can use Lethal Venom on neutrals, right? So before you couldn't use this on neutrals. This makes her farming a lot better. You can also use it on objectives. So this makes her taking tower a lot easier. And the final change that's the point is if you max Slither, you now gain a barrier when you initiate a slide. Now, this has a cooldown of, I think it's 8 seconds base. Right now, I don't have cooldowns enabled. But if I enable cooldowns, 8-second base cooldown. This is affected by cooldown reduction. So if I get Transcendent cooldown with enchanters and a bunch of other items, then, you know, the cooldown on this can be reduced quite significantly, you know, all the way to like 5 seconds roughly. But this is quite a cool change that gives her a little bit more survivability. And the barrier has a 0.6 spirit scaling as well. Also, she leaves a green trail, as you can see. Warden basically got nothing burger. His spirit scaling on his ults got changed from 1.45 to 1.3, so he gets slightly rewarded for that, slightly less rewarded. But his fire rate spirit scaling was increased from 0.22 to 0.25, which is a little bit over a 10% buff, just to put it in perspective. So now he gets more rewarded even for building Boundless as far as fire rate. If you build just Boundless, as you can see, I have 17% fire rate just from Boundless. This is counting the spirit investment, but you know, this means that scaling spirit is starting to be a pretty significant way of building fire rate on Warden. Wraith got some nice buffs. She was buffed. Her base weapon damage was buffed from 5.115 to 5.4, which should make her feel a lot better in lane. On top of that, the delay between cards was changed from 0.75 to 0.7, which means you can spam cards more often. Her bullet growth was nerfed a little bit to compensate, but I do think Wraith is going to be a little bit better this patch. Now, there's quite a long list of items that were changed, and this video is already getting pretty lengthy, so I don't want to cover all of them. However, I'm going to cover, to me, the highlights. Starting with the weapon category, we've had a few changes. So Headshot Booster got nerfed by 5 damage. Mystic Shot got nerfed a little bit as well, but it still doesn't have fall off, so I think it's going to be pretty oppressive. And the big nerf in the weapon category is Cultist Sacrifice, which got, first of all, its base health nerfed very significantly, as well as the scaling. So now realistically, if you go max level, right? Previously, max level would give you like 350 health. Now max level only gives you 207 bonus health, which should make this item, you know, feel a lot more reasonable, because when you have the buff active, this item is not going to be, you know, more bang for your buck than other items. The problem with this item previously was that it accelerated your farm and it outperformed almost every other item in its category through its pure stats while the buff was active. Now its stats are a lot worse, and the cooldown was also increased by 10 seconds, which makes it so the buff is not going to be active as often, even if you have, you know, superior duration. For example, if you have superior duration, the buff lasts 205 seconds, but it's on cooldown for 260. And if you have Transcendent cooldown on top of that, I believe that you can essentially have it almost permanent. You do have it permanent if you have both Transcendent cooldown and superior duration, but most of the time you'll only have superior duration if you have anything at all. And that will make it so that there is a decent amount of downtime. Now, I think that a potential slept on item is Spirit Rend. It got a slight buff. I think it was already pretty good, but now you can stack the different Spirit Rend stacks 2.25 seconds from each other rather than 2.5 seconds. This means that you can get the max stacks a little bit quicker, and the max stacks is already like, you know, crazy shred in my opinion. Now, the last item in the weapon category that stands out to me from these changes is Spiritual Overflow. This item got a crazy buff. It went from duration on hit. You got 20% duration before. Now you get 20% ability cooldown reduction. Now, a ton of heroes can benefit from this, but the most obvious one that comes to mind is Mirage with some of these new changes, right? Where Mirage now benefits from cooldown reduction on Jin's Mark. Spiritual Overflow already makes a ton of sense, right? Because the moment you proc it, you get extra spirit for your Jin's Mark, and on top of that, the cooldown reduction applies to your Jin's Mark. So if I then build superior cooldown as well as this, you'll be able to see how quickly I'm able to proc my different stacks. But if you look very quickly, and then I put a little bit of time, a little bit of points in my ability, I can stack this insanely fast, right? Just to showcase it on a first one, here's kind of like how fast these stacks start. So you can get to 12x like insanely quickly with this new change. Now, going over to the Vitality category, there's a couple changes that are significant. I would say the first one is Veilwalker. Veilwalker base heal got nerfed quite significantly, so it's now 85. I believe it was 150 before. So you need to have some sort of level in order to kind of like compensate. The scaling of it did get buffed though. So if you go Veilwalker around, 12 to 13k souls, the heal is 187, which is still pretty reasonable. So I don't think that the item is dead at all. A lot of people asking me if it's dead. I just think that you can't like rush it first item in lane anymore, or it's going to be way less efficient, but it's still really good like once you get it in the mid game. The cooldown also got nerfed. Now, counterspell is pretty much getting nerfed every patch. Not too surprising. The item's insane. Now you can only parry for 0.8 seconds instead of 0.9. Now it's starting to get to the point where the parry spell duration at 0.8 seconds is not quite long enough to fully counter Lash anymore. So Lash may still be able to get his ult if you parry it, if he just waits on the channel. So this is going to start to affect some interactions for sure. Now, to me, the other most kind of like important change is Diviner's Kevlar. Now, Diviner's Kevlar duration was doubled from 10, I think it was 10, or I can't remember exactly what it was. It went from 13 to 20 seconds. Sorry, it wasn't quite doubled, but plus 7 seconds, which is extremely significant. So the barrier lasts a long time. On top of that, it went from giving you plus 25 spirit to plus 35 spirit for 23 seconds. So I think that this item is going to make a resurgence probably. It's very strong. 1,000 barrier is a lot of value as well. So I would expect this item to be back on certain heroes like potentially Pocket, potentially Warden, etc. Now, in the Spirit category, there's a few items. Rusted Barrel is now starting to be, I would say, it's starting to be pretty insane. The fact that it gives you 8% bullet The fact that it gives you 8% bullet resist shred is a lot of value for an 800 cost item. When you consider the fact that, bullet resist shredder itself gives you minus 13% for twice the cost. So this is a lot more value. Obviously, this isn't permanent, and it also slows down their fire rate, and it also gives you 60 bonus health, and it gives you sprint speed. So this item is starting to be really, really good value if you have the slots for it. It's really cheap, really good value, but the biggest problem with the item is that it takes an active slot, and it builds into Disarming Hex, which is a good item as well. So I think that this item is probably going to be super slept on, but is very strong now. Mystic Burst was nerfed somewhat by 2 seconds, right? So 14 instead of 12 seconds. Quicksilver Reload is probably the most significant one. It was taken from 55 damage to 44 damage. This hurts a bunch of heroes, including Lash, including Mo and Krill, including Mirage. Any hero that was kind of dependent on this item in the laning stage is going to suffer from this change. Cold Front base damage was also nerfed by 5. So the base damage is 95 instead of 100. Disarming Hex was buffed on the range, so we got a kind of a double buff from Rusted Barrel and went from 32 meter cast range instead of 23 meters. Silence Wave was nerfed in its duration from 3.25 seconds to 3 seconds. Spirit Snatch got a tap on the wrist, it went from 10% melee damage to 7. Greater Expansion is kind of whatever, and Spirit Burn is really the big change, which now it goes on cooldown for half the normal time when used on non-heroes rather than 0 cooldown. Like I said, the item still lies. I'll make sure to report this to the developers, but the item does lie in its description. It says it doesn't go on cooldown, but it does. Now, my overall conclusions on the patch is that there's overall some slight nerfs to Spirit and some slight buffs to Gun. So I think that we should be at a stronger balance between Spirit and Gun in this current patch. I also think that we'll see the resurgence of a couple heroes that have been a little bit underwhelming for some time. My prediction is Calico is going to be quite strong. Victor's OP is going to need to get nerfed. He's probably going to get nerfed quite quickly. I think Warden is going to be really strong as well. I think Wraith will rise up the ranks. I think Shiv is also going to rise up the ranks. I think that he was already kind of like, on the rise, but I think that with these changes as well, the fact that he wasn't really touched and he was already strong and other heroes got nerfed will help him a lot. I think Grey Talon will kind of like, fall off the face of the planet a little bit. I think he'll go from like this super OP hero to kind of like mid. We'll see though. I could be wrong about that. And I think that Doorman will only keep gaining popularity. And I want to say on record, I was wrong about Gun Doorman. I was the #1 hater of Gun Doorman. But I will say that there are some things that I miscalculated, such as his bullet size and how easy it is to hit headshots on him. And basically, you can shoot almost anywhere and get a headshot, basically. So that's why I underestimated. But those are my predictions for the patch. We'll see if it ends up being true. I also think that, certain meta heroes are going to fall down a little bit. Abrams is going to fall down a little bit. Mo and Krill is going to fall down a little bit. But this patch is obviously a small balance patch. It's not going to have massive impacts on everything, but we're definitely going to see the order of like, oh, this hero's OP change for sure. Let me know what you think of the patch in the comments. I'm sorry, I want to apologize for my lack of videos lately. My editor has been on vacation, and on top of that, I was on a break myself before, so it's just been unlucky, but there will be more to come. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day.